Work as something I have to do. It's a chore. I have no choice about it. What do they expect? Nothing much. They look forward to TGIF, or the holiday, the break, the end of the semester, the end of the 2-year period, or whatever it may be. The career perception, orientation. Money and advancement are what motivates these individuals, getting to the next stage. Work as, it's a race to the top. This is where the rat racers mostly reside. The expectation, more prestige, more power, more money, more prestige, more power. Again, advancement, attainment, achievement of the next goal. And they're looking forward to the next promotion. And this applies to different areas. It could be from pre-med to med school to internship at the best place to the chief head of the department to the chief of the hospital. It could be the race from being an analyst to an associate to a partner. It could be the race from being an assistant to an associate to a full professor. It can apply to any area, the rat race. The lucky few who perceive their work as calling, the motivation is the thing in itself. It's about a self-concordant goal. It's also about a self-concordant journey. How do they perceive work? It's a mission. It's a vocation. It's what they were meant to be doing. It's what they want to be doing more than anything else in the world. They see it not as a chore, but as a privilege to be engaged in what it is that they're doing. The expectations, their mission, a better world. And finally, what do they look forward to? More work. More work where they can actualize themselves, where they can fulfill themselves, where they can be, to use the military cliche, all they can be. Now, when you look at this, it's mostly impossible to experience a sense of calling and mission and a self-concordant journey every hour of the day, just like it's not possible to be happy and to constantly and to experience that constant high. You know, for example, teaching is my calling. I certainly experience a sense of calling. It's the thing in itself. It's what I want to do professionally more than anything else in the world. At the same time, there are elements of teaching that I don't enjoy as much, and I do feel that I fall a little bit toward, well, this is my job, I have to do it. Such as going over my lecture notes 5 times before each lecture. The first time, pretty interesting. You know, second and third, it gets a little bit repetitive. But I know that if I want to produce a good and effective lecture, because that is my calling, teaching, I have to go over it many times. And I can tell the difference when I go over it once or twice versus 5 times. So that's important to me. But that part of my work, it is a chore, something that I have to do. However, remember the trickle effect, because overall, there is a sense of calling. Overall, it's a self-concordant goal, as well as journey. Even those parts are okay, not that bad. Or let's say you really enjoy a certain course. Let's take a hypothetical example, 1504. And another hypothetical example, you happen to have a midterm in a week. You know, you may not enjoy every step of the way, you know, going over the material for the second time or third time. However, if overall that experience is self-concordant, important to you, and you enjoy it, even that part will not be that bad. It will be okay. Especially if you start seeing that during that process you're beginning to make new connections, understand things, important things about yourself. The important thing also to keep in mind about calling is that while it does depend to some extent on the kind of work that you do, it depends much more on your perception of the work. So the research that I talk about in the book is about cleaners in a hospital who were able to see their work as a calling. Why? Because they interpreted their work not as, I have to pick up the garbage and clean the toilet, which they actually had to do, but more as, I'm taking care of these patients, because without my work, without me doing excellent work, there'd be more pollution and more people hurt in the hospital. And these people who perceived, these cleaners who perceived their work, had the calling orientation, were much more likely to engage in conversation with the patients in the hospital, were much more likely to help. And interestingly, many doctors from these same hospitals perceived their work as a job. Now, you are more likely, and again, not good, not bad, it is, you are more likely to find a sense of calling in your work if you're a leader versus the janitor or the cleaning person in an organization. It's more likely. However, that does not mean that the person who cleans the hospital cannot find a calling, and there are many examples. And the examples that Wisniewski talks about in the research are things such as comparing between cleaners and other cleaners, calling versus chore, between certain hairdressers who see their work as a chore versus ones who see it as a calling. And I'm sure you've had your hair cut with with certain hairdressers who really do see it as a calling. I mean, there are more psychologists than hairdressers. Or engineers. Some just see their work, okay, I have to do this, that's all I think about, versus thinking about the bigger picture. I'm not just a cog in the mill, I'm part of an important project. We can perceive almost any work as falling into one of the three categories. Think about investment banking. I know many of you are going into investment banking. One of the ways to perceive investment banking is, I'm going there and I'm going to make a beep load of money and I'm going to have a great lifestyle. And that's an important motivation. Again, people aren't and shouldn't be impervious to the material comforts. That's okay. However, people who only look at that, who only look, okay, that's going to give me a great lifestyle. I'm going to send my kids to the best schools, which is a good thing, and I'm going to live in a beautiful neighborhood, a beautiful house, and a big car, and have a lot of prestige. Again, human nature, these needs. It's fine. But people who just look at these things will not be happy or will not live up to their potential of happiness in the long run. However, if I look at investment banking as that and also an opportunity to create jobs, which it does do. J.P. Morgan and all the investment bankers who came up after him have created millions and millions of jobs that would not have existed without investment banking. That investment banking is also about lubricating the wheels of the economy. That it will also provide me an opportunity to then go and contribute, whether it's financially or from my knowledge, to not-for-profit organizations. Because today what not-for-profit organizations need most is effective, sound, professional fiscal policies, which you learn as an investment banker or a consultant or whatever it is. Now, some people say, you're rationalizing if you're looking at investment banking as all these things. You're not rationalizing. You know what you're doing? You're simply looking at reality, at things that are real, that are there, they're not invented, but most people do not see them, just like most people did not see the children on the bus. And when you don't see something, as far as you're concerned, it doesn't exist. And for most investment bankers, they burn out because they don't also, not only, but they don't also see the positive components of that work, components that certainly can fall under a calling. Again, most works, whether it's working in a hospital and taking care of cleanliness, whether it's working as a medical doctor, whether it's working as an investment banker, as a teacher, as a volunteer, as a monk, whatever it is, can be perceived as a job, can be perceived as a career, and can be perceived as a calling. And very often the choice is up to you. How do you interpret it? Abraham Maslow. It is certainly true that many of us evade our constitutionally suggested vocation, call, destiny, task in life, mission. So often we run away from the responsibilities dictated, or rather suggested, by nature, by fate, even sometimes by accident, just as Jonah tried in vain to run away from his fate. What is your fate? What is your calling? What is your destiny? Just listen to the voice that suggests your vocation. Just listen to the call that guides you to your calling. What is it? You know, the problem is that we don't take time to think about these questions. Sometimes because we're afraid of the answer. Because what if it is teaching? You know, what about all the pressure that I feel from outside to go and be a consultant? Or what if it is investment banking? What about all the pressure that I hear from my friends and colleagues who say, well, you should do something else, more quote-unquote noble with your Harvard education? The most noble thing is to listen to that inner voice. Because when we pursue our passions, when we pursue a self-concordant goal and a self-concordant journey, that's when we come alive. And that's when we also make the world a better place. Remember Gandhi, be the change you want to see in the world. And if you want a happier world, begin with yourself. Easier said than done. But it's probably the most important question that you can ask of yourself. And by the way, the answer may change. It may be one thing today, it may be something different 2.5 years from now. And it may be very different 22.5 years from now or 50 years from now. But asking this question, when we really, truly ask this question, we open up possibilities and see things that we may have not seen before. Our, metaphorically speaking, children on the bus, our fate, our destiny, our vocation, our calling. I think it was captured best, this whole idea, by one of the students who sat where you're sitting just 2 years ago, also one of the co-founders of Women in Business, Ebony Carter. Instead of focusing on what we can live with, we should be thinking about what we can't live without. What can't you live without? What are you about? Our next topic, related to goals, related to what we discussed last time, is something that I'm sure none of you can relate to, something that is completely foreign to you and your friends sitting around you, and that is not what I expected to come up on the screen. But soon we will get to that topic, I promise. So just a few, before we move on to that very important topic, I just wanted to build tension. It was all planned, of course. Before we get to that topic, just a few tips about setting goals. Some basic ones. First, write them down. You know, writing them down is making a commitment. Much more of a commitment than just saying them even. It's better to say them publicly than to say them just to ourselves or think about them, but writing them down makes a difference. A lot of research showing the effect of making plans, lists, and writing goals. Second, set lifelines. You know, people talk about deadlines. Tammy, my wife, says, I think it's much more effective, much more useful to set lifelines. Dates by which we hope to achieve those certain goals. Why lifelines? Because goals, especially self-concordant goals, are about inspiring us. In other words, putting the spirit inside us. They're about making our life happier, more energetic. So lifeline, setting goals, very important. It's not, I will do the following soonish. It's, I will do the following by the 1st of July, 2009. Connected to this, make them specific. In other words, it's not, I'm going to improve sales pretty soon or very quickly, but rather, I'm going to increase sales 5% by December 31, 2008. Specific lifeline as well as specific project. Also, let's say I want to become fit. It's not just the generic, I want to become fitter. It's rather, I'm going to run 5 miles 4 times a week by October 15, 2008. Concrete, specific. Remember what we talked about. The most important thing about goals is not achieving those goals. It's not that is what will make us happy or sad if we do or don't achieve them. The key is to energize us, to motivate us, to liberate us, to contribute as a means toward the end being the journey. The goals that facilitate the journey best are goals that we actually have, not all goals, but some goals, 50% of achieving. It's the goals such as Kennedy set in 1962. We'll reach the moon by the end of the decade, at the time when the metal that was necessary to withstand the heat of getting out of space and coming back to Earth was not even invented. It was at a time when they did not have the technology on numerous levels to land a person on the moon. And yet he declared that goal, that by the end of this decade we will do it. It energized NASA. Some people thought he was crazy, but it energized them. And you know that after 1969, NASA experienced a real drop in their motivation, in their passion, until essentially the mid-80s, because they didn't have a similar inspiring goal. We see it also on the individual level. And I talk about it in the book, where people had goals and then did not achieve these goals, or achieved these goals and did not set new goals. And they felt enervated and very often uninspired. Stretch goals. Ellen Langer did the following research. Bring in a group of people and introduce them to highly successful scientists and inventors. And then she asked them, these were world famous, world-class performers. And she asked these individuals, these students, to assess these very successful individuals and then to say, how likely are you to reach their level? And they assessed them extremely highly, they respected them, they admired them, and they said that they were unlikely to achieve that level. And then she brought a second group of students and she got them to look at the exact same individuals, same highly successful scientists, inventors, people who really made it, with one difference. She also introduced some of the characteristics of their path toward greatness. For example, failures on the way, insecurity, disappointments, hardships, and how they actually got from point A to point B. And then she asked them to evaluate them, and they respected them highly, just as much. And when she asked, how likely are you to achieve those goals? Much more likely. And as we know, beliefs are self-fulfilling prophecies. Number one predictor of long-term success in addition, the John Cotter research, in addition to constantly asking questions, it's believing that you can do well. And if we only look at the outcome and not the journey, we're much less likely to believe that we can attain this outcome. Breaking down success. As Langer said, people can imagine themselves taking steps, while great heights seem entirely forbidden. Have a long-term goal, and then break it down to a shorter-term or a medium-term goal, short-term goal, and then make plans, and then create rituals based on these plans. Step by step, breaking down achievement. Much more likely to believe that it's possible, and consequently much more likely to actually get there. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the moment you've all been waiting for. Something that none of you are familiar with, that you may not be able to connect to, but something that, please indulge me, and I will talk about. Stress. So I asked at the beginning of the class who wants to experience less stress. Most of you put your hand up. Stress is a global, not American, not Western, global epidemic. By the end of this class, within 20 minutes, my hope is that we will all look like this. Minus the beer if you're not 21 yet. Now, the most important thing when dealing with stress, and again it is a global, very problematic epidemic. We talked about procrastination. This is what I do when I procrastinate. I go on Google Image and look for things like that. And then I tell myself it's part of your work, it's important. Yeah. It's all about cognitive reframing. When dealing with stress, what we need to do is take time out. Let me share with you, and again I've talked about this before, but this is from the New England Journal of Medicine, an article written by our very own Richard Kedison. He's the head of mental health services here. In a recent national survey of 13,500 college students, nearly 45% reported being so depressed that they had difficulty functioning, and 94% reported feeling overwhelmed by everything they had to do. 45%. You know, people, when they asked me about the class at Harvard, the fact that it's a popular class, they said, is it because it's Harvard? It's because at Harvard there is more stress than... No, there isn't. In fact, when the Crimson did ask a similar question, they found at Harvard 47%. So really, no difference nationwide, regardless of which university, which college you go to. This is startling. I mean, I was shocked. I mean, I've been on college campus for the last 16 years. I know the situation, but I was even surprised by this number. And this is not the regular ups and downs that we go through 10 times a day. This is depression to the point of not functioning. How can we explain it? The 45%, by looking at the 94%. Let me be more specific. You see, students today clearly have too much to do. When I was a resident tutor in Leverett House, given that my PhD was also from the business school, my role was a pre-business tutor. So what I did, as many of you know, was I looked at students' resumes, at the CVs, and helped them hone it, make it better for the recruiting process or other processes where they were looking for work. And it really amazed me that just about every year, the resumes became more impressive. Smaller fonts, bigger titles, narrower margins. Each year. You know what very often the older generation says, who has gone to Harvard? They say, I wouldn't have gotten into Harvard today. It's true. It's unfortunate, but it's true. And I looked at these resumes and I was very impressed. And I said, wow, until I noticed the price that students You, me, we're paying for the smaller fonts and narrower margins. And the price is that we feel overwhelmed, too much to do, stress, anxiety, and as a result of it, and there's a lot of data supporting this arrow, as a result of this, higher likelihood of depression. And this is what we see on college campuses. This is what we see around the country. This is what we see around the world. Because I'd recently returned from China, not very different from this. I recently came from Australia, very similar to this. Trying to fit in too many things into little time, taking more courses, being part of more student organizations. And that exacts a price. Okay, here she is. The psychologist, the one and only Ellen DeGeneres, talking about the state of affairs.
I believe that someday sitcoms will be 30 seconds long. Because that's all we'll need and that's all our attention span can take, because our attention span is shot. We've all got attention deficit disorder, ADD or OCD, or one of the disorders with 3 letters, because we don't have the time and patience to pronounce the entire disorder. That should be a disorder right there. TBD, too busy disorder. The weather is actually the happiest part of the news, because at some point you're going to hear something positive. You're going to hear, it's a beautiful day, or it's going to be a beautiful day. And it's nice to take in something positive, you know, because we hear all this negative stuff all the time, and we go out into the world and it's so chaotic, and not that we're going to notice if it's a beautiful day, we're moving too fast to even pay attention to that. And we need help to keep up with that pace, so we put a coffee shop here, and there's a coffee shop here, and a coffee shop here, and a coffee shop here, and the smallest coffee is a tall, and I'll have a coffee and a side of Red Bull, because I'm very, very busy. I've got TBD and I'm late for yoga. Hurry! Hurry!
TBD should be part of the DSM. Really should be. We pay a very high price for this TBD. First of all, psychological health. One of the best predictors of depression. Physical health. Many doctors estimate that about 80% of our physical ailments are a result of stress, weakened immune system. And finally, today, this year, the number one cause for loss of days at work globally is something related to our psychology, whether it's stress or related emotions, feelings, experiences. It never used to be that in the past. Today, it's psychological reasons. And we pay a price both in terms of our productivity as well as creativity. Think back to the broaden and build theory. When we're stressed, we're more likely to narrow and constrict as opposed to think outside the box. All right, so what do we do with this stress? What do we do with it? Let's use positive psychology, because it really is a problem that we want to be able to deal with, that I know, certainly personally, it's a problem that I've dealt with for a very long time. So the conventional question, the traditional psychologist question was, why are so many people stressed? An important question, good question that yielded many great answers, but not enough. And then positive psychologists came in, and what they did was ask also the positive question. Just like when we talked about the research with at-risk population, just like Marva Collins asked a different question, because questions open up avenues, quests that we may have not seen before. And the question became, what do those who are successful and able to lead a healthy and happy life do? In other words, focusing on what works. In other words, focusing on the tip of the stem. Because while most people are stressed, not all of them are. There are people who are able to be successful and at the same time lead a healthy and happy life. What do they do? What is it about them? Here is what they do. What was found was that there are some distinguishing characteristics, two of them. They set rituals for themselves, and we talked about rituals in the past. The second thing that they do, and this is what I'm going to elaborate on now, the second thing that they do in addition to having rituals, whether it's a lot of rituals or a few rituals, depending on individual needs and differences, in addition to setting rituals, they particularly set rituals for both work and for recovery. Let me explain. What I'm going to say now is something that psychologists did not see before because it was hidden, just like the children on the bus were hidden by the first question. It was only asking the second question that they noticed this. What they noticed was that these individuals ritualized work and recovery, and in essence, what they found, and this is the most surprising result to my mind in studying stress, is that stress was actually not the problem. We were looking in the wrong place. In fact, what they found was that stress was good for us. That stress actually cultivated resilience, strength, and helped us be happier in the long run. Wait a minute. What does that mean? Well, think about the following analogy. Think about the physical realm. What happens to you? What actually happens to you when you go to the gym? When you go to the gym, you lift weights. What are you doing to your muscle? You're stressing your muscle. In fact, you're tearing parts of it. There are micro tears in your cells. Now, is this a bad thing that you're doing that? Not at all. It's a good thing because you lift weights, and then 2 days later, you lift these weights again, and the next week you continue lifting these weights, and you do it for a month, and 2 and 4 months, and 6 months, and after a year of lifting weights, you begin to look like me. Or maybe not. So the stress part is actually good for us. What's the problem, though? When do the problems begin with stressing those muscles? It's when you lift weights, and a minute later you lift the same weights again, and again, and again, and again, and so on and so on. What would happen to you then if you don't take a break, whether it's a break between sessions or whether it's a day's break? What happens to you then? That's when you get injured. That's when you get hurt. That's when you actually tear or pull a muscle. That's when you become overworked, and that has psychological as well as physical effects. That's when you overtrain. In other words, the problem is not stress, not on the physical level, nor on the psychological level. The problem is lack of recovery. Individuals who are both successful, happy, thriving, flourishing, are ones who do experience stress. However, they also pay very close attention to recovery. Just like any athlete here in this room knows, you have tapering, you have time off before important games. You don't lift the same weights day in and day out. The same thing on the psychological level. If we don't take breaks, we will pay a price. On the physical level, we get injured. On the psychological level, we experience anxiety, ultimately, potentially, depression. Stress is fine, it's good, it's exciting at times, if we also have recovery. I want to share with you now some more ideas from the book that I talked about before, The Power of Full Engagement, that again I highly recommend you read, maybe over spring break. And what Tony Schwartz and Jim Lohr talk about is that what we need to do is change our perception of our day from being marathon runners to being sprinters. From going on and on and on to sprinting, recovery. Sprinting, recovery. That understanding changed my life. You see, I was a marathon runner, metaphorically, meaning at work. I used to work 14 hours a day. I loved my work. I worked extremely hard. And then I decided to get married and to have children. And I knew that things would change as a result of that. And I said, okay, I'll have to compromise. I'll have to work less than 14 hours a day if I want to maintain a healthy relationship with my spouse and with my kids. And it disappointed me to some extent, but I had my priorities and I made a choice. And then I met Tony Schwartz, who within a few minutes changed my perception, my understanding of what my day can and ought to look like. And when he explained to me this, it made immediate sense. I started to implement it. And today, I may not be as productive as I was when I worked for 14 hours a day, but very close to it. And I'm certainly happier, and I'm more creative than I was when I was a marathoner. And here is his suggestion. One of the things that he talked about in the book. This is the ritual that I recommend. And it is, have 60 to 120 minutes, so around 90 minutes of sprint. Work, concentrate, focus, hard. Go for it. And then, after that, after you sprint with as little distractions as possible, have 15 minutes or so of recovery. What psychologists have found is that essentially we're able to sprint, to focus, according to our biorhythms, between 60 and 120 minutes. It differs. Some people are more 60, others can do it for 2 hours. Average, 90 minutes. After you sprint, take 15 minutes off, whether it's for meditation, listening to your favorite piece of music, whether it's for going to the gym. It can be, of course, more than 15 minutes, but at least 15 minutes. Having lunch, having a break, and during lunch not doing emails and being on the phone, which only adds to the stress. Really relaxing with friends or by ourselves. And when we have a day that's structured with sprint, recovery, that's when we can sustain, when we have the highest levels of energy, when we get the most done, and when we're happiest. This is my day now. My day comprises sprint, recovery, sprint, recovery. I'm able to get so much more done. My ideal day, work day, is 90 minutes, 15-minute meditation, 90 minutes, lunch, 90 minutes, workout, 90 minutes, home with the family. Actually, net, I work for 6 hours a day. But in those 6 hours, I get more than I would have in 10. Not to mention the fact that I'm happier and more creative doing it. The key when doing it is to maintain flexibility. Because, again, the ideal day for me would be that. However, there are other things. You know, I travel a lot. I teach a class. And during those times, let's say I'm not by my computer writing or doing research. And again, because these are important things to me. So what I've done, for example, is say, I want 10 90-minute sessions, the ritual of 10 90-minute sessions a week. Some of these 90-minute sessions are on a flight, and that's okay. Some of these 90-minute sessions are at home or in my office. But at least 10, usually more than 10 90-minute sessions a week. And when I have that, I'm happy, I feel good, I get a lot done. Also, the ritual of yoga. Maintain flexibility there. So one of the things that were difficult for me was to introduce a 45-minute or a 1-hour session a day. And now yoga is important for me. It makes me feel good, and I'll talk about the research around it after break. So what I started to do was breaking down yoga sessions, and now part of my 15 minutes in between is a 15-minute yoga, sun salutations, for 15 minutes. And then the next 15 minutes is another part of a yoga practice. So I break yoga into 2 or 3 sessions a day instead of 1. Again, the flexibility of a ritual. And that for me works very well. The key is, and I'm going to end with this, the key is to attain multi-level recovery. First, recovery on the micro level. 15 minutes, meditation, 1 hour of gym, whatever it is, a lunch break. mezzo level recovery, and that is a good night's sleep. We'll talk about the importance of sleep. Sleep is a good investment for well-being, happiness, as well as for your creativity, for your memory. Sleep is important. A day off during the week. Even God needed a day off. Implemented in our lives. And finally, those vacations. Remember J.P. Morgan, I can do the work of a year in 9 months, but not in 12. Recreation leads to creation. So remember that. Remember that.